Welcome to Victor or Death, the podcast for content creators. My name's Elijah, and these are my co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I talk about video games over at my channel, The Mildly Morose Man.
I'm Cameron. I'm host of Wildcard Cameron YouTube channel and the podcast Sweating the Small Stuff.
Sup, gamers? This is Keon, and I run the podcast Life Advice with Keon, as well as the YouTube channel that I co-produce with a friend of mine on YouTube called Frameforge.
Perfect.
Right?
Well, if you guys have listened to the past two episodes, you know that we are doing a deep dive into what it takes to structure a better interview and how to just do the whole interview process better. And today we are talking about finding the whole story within an interview and also asking challenging questions, how to do that better, what not to do, when to know when to back off. So today is getting into the nitty gritty of like really doing the interview and how to feel things out. We've talked about interview structure and transitioning last week, how to get prepared and how to kind of keep the interview going as you're and kind of keeping it on track. But there are times where you want to derail and dig into something. So to start, how do you follow that intuition that there might be something more to tease out?
I'm going to level with you, and it's going to be the most reductive answer that I could possibly give across any of these episodes. From what I understand, having seen interviews, done interviews, whatever, it's if you've done your homework and research and background and, pre-interview and all that stuff, it's when you're satisfied. Because other people can always come in and say, oh yeah, I know something in this interview that this person did with Elijah, and I would like to get more context on that. But at the end of the day, you could objectively, to a point of distress, just continue probing this person into the most personal depths of their lives. But when you are satisfied for the specific thing you were trying to ask them about, I think that's a good spot.
I don't think that was what we were going for.
I'm confused.
I was asking, how do you know when to dig in further, not when you know that it's done.
That's what I'm saying. Are you satisfied?
No, sorry.
Oh,
I mean, sure.
I see. So when you're not satisfied, you keep digging. That's what
this
you're
was
saying.
An excellent example of how
That's
Elijah was
fair.
not satisfied with my answer.
So I kept
So
digging.
he asked me to keep going, and
Dang,
I
yeah, I
continued
like
to.
Man, you set me up
Yeah,
with
this is-
just real crafty there.
Yeah, satisfaction.
hard.
I
That's
feel
good.
so dumb. Thank
It
you.
accepted the crap out of me.
That's good. No, that's good because you can sometimes feel that. Like if you are paying attention to what they're talking about and somebody mentions like, yeah, that we started this company during this time and it was really hard for me because whatever. Like just saying like, yeah, there's a lot of family stuff, and then if they keep going and say, well, I heard you mention something about some roadblocks that you might have had along the way. Would you mind going into a little bit of that? Like going back a little bit and exploring something that you're just like, oh, that gave me a little bit of the spider sense. Wow, that joke didn't land. But like, it like gives you a little bit of the that could be something interesting, or it seems like something that they might have wanted to go. Like it definitely was something that they in their mind was thinking more about, but decided not to say anything extra because they didn't think it was germane to the subject. So maybe giving them like noticing in the conversation if they say something with loaded adjectives. Like, yeah, it was a hard time for me, or that was a really great year for me, whatever. And then just going back and noticing that and then using those words back with them. Well, you said it was a hard time. Well, you said it was a great year. Would you mind expanding on that? And then more likely than not, they wouldn't mind expanding because it's what's on their mind.
Another thing, like exactly in that vein, is they're inside their own head. They kind of it's one of those things where it's like, when you start talking about something and immediately reminds you of something else, all those little memories are connected inside your own brain. Once you're on that path, you can actually end up asking the same question a few times, but because you package it differently, they're going to effectively still be answering the same question, but as you slowly pull those like different memory threads in their brain, you'll notice like they won't give different answers, but they'll give more complete answers. Like you can start with, what was it like starting this company? Oh, well, we decided that we're going to start making bikes for people in problem areas because they need to get around. And then you're like, all right, but like what motivated you to start this company? It's like, oh, well, we noticed that people in these problem areas couldn't get around. And so we thought, well, what if we just make bikes? That's something that everyone more or less knows how to use, and so on and so forth. And you're effectively asking the same question, but now you're pulling those little pieces that might not have been at the forefront of their mind when they started answering the question the first time.
Yeah, like and going off of that, like if that is the question, then well, how did you notice that there was a need for this? And then they might go into an anecdote about that, and that might lead to something else that's a little bit more explanative of the process by which they got it going. And something I meant to mention in the last episode is that, and I mentioned that a good way to structure an interview, if you don't really have an idea of how to do it, is chronologically, because human beings, like Cameron said, they kind of have that chronological nature in your brain. You think of, for lack of a better term, like a Lego, instruction manual of, oh, well, I'll do this and then this and this and this. So if you're maybe changing a tire off the top of your head, you probably remember, well, I have to do this to get to here. There's just a procedure to it. Your memory can be very similar where, well, this happened and then this happened and this happened. And it's more of a cause and effect thing in your head, and sometimes you can get locked into that where, oh, well, we did this, we did this, we did that, and then maybe taking a moment and going back to the emotion behind it, less the procedure and more about the feeling, or more about what was particularly happening in their lives outside of the procedure that might make for a more rich story.
And actually, part of that is something I actually didn't get a chance to talk about in the last episode when it came to interview structure, that the whole story, this idea in this episode really helps with, is just like you said, that cause and effect. Humans are very storytelling driven character people. That was an awful sentence. Humans,
they're storytelling driven characters. Yeah.
Yes, we're NPCs in a game. No, humans.
You're all NPCs in my game. I don't know what to tell you.
No, that's how you know you have
and that might be
problem.
true, Sean. In a very philosophical way, that might be true. But sorry, what I was trying to get at was, humans respond well to stories. We don't respond well to facts. We don't respond well to you just saying specific things. We respond to, what is this suspenseful moment, and what is the payoff? What is that thing that is like, where was the tension? Where was the drama that you are now paying off? And when you go through the process, like Keon said, very cause and effect wise, weirdly enough, that is how a lot of us think. We think in a way like we don't always necessarily see the full cause, but we can see some part of the cause and understand how that effect played out. And then when they start talking more about it, and you start to see, it wasn't just that like I lost my car and I lost my job. It's like, because I had this problem, I lost my car and I lost my job. And that helps add that tension and investment that gets people. And I realize I'm doing some really buck wild like examples compared to the kinds of interviews I've actually done, but that's more or less where it is. It's like getting that tension is very important for the full story, and having that cause and effect is very helpful for getting the tension.
I think I want to stir something up to Dan. It sounds like you might already have a thought though. But I think this relates probably more with how Dan works with people. When you're teasing out that whole story, you're teasing out a truth of the situation. So when someone gives you their initial answer, there might be some editing that happens. Like they're like, oh, I'm not gonna share this detail. I'm not gonna do that. And that's not to say that they're lying to you. It's just, it's not the whole picture. And so your job as the interviewer is to tease out some of those truths that come with what they're talking about to help further contextualize their answer, which makes it more interesting. If you're enjoying this episode, please leave an honest rating for us wherever you're listening from. Also, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and join our subreddit to talk about the latest episodes or ask for help on your content creation journey. All those links can be found in the show notes. Without further ado, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, that actually just made me think of something. When I'm speaking with people to get some of their history, I often ask like about their family relationships, and even just recently, I was talking with a woman where I asked her about her children, and she brought up one of her kids first, and talked about how well they were doing, and I thought, oh, that was kind of weird. You know, she made it sound like she had more than one, but she just talked about her son and how much of a success he is, and she didn't bring up her daughter. So that probably
Hey,
means that you know, that there's something there that she's not either proud of or sort of a spot of pain, you know? And so even just within a moment or something like that, it came out and she said, you know, my daughter's had a harder time with things. But just being able to map out those relationships, be listening for the kinds of things that people are offering up and then the things that they're leaving out could be a way to sort of get deeper into the story.
have you guys ever played LA Noir?
Unfortunately, I have not.
No, but
You
it's been
press
on
X
sale
for
a
doubt,
bunch.
Keon.
Exactly. You press X for doubt, you press Y for lying, and you find it out. That's what you do. No,
No, like
in the same but in the same vein, like you gotta kind of be a bit of a detective, like you just said, like pick up on those context clues. Like that's really that is a perfect example of if somebody wants to talk about something, they will, and if they don't, they'll probably keep it pretty curt.
I appreciate you qualifying that because something I want to make clear is like if someone is going to be this uncomfortable about saying something or they're really trying to hold back, there's probably a good reason. And unless that reason is incredibly salient, and even if it is incredibly salient to the specific thing you're trying to understand, you need to have the utmost respect and care for that person because they are taking the time to be open with you. And if they're not going to talk about it, you have to just accept that because there's no one should be upset or feel uncomfortable in that way when the entire point is that you're trying to get them to, well, you're not trying to get them to do anything. You're wanting to help them open up. And no one feels like opening up when you're probing them about sensitive things that they really don't want to share.
So that actually balances something that you were saying at the beginning because it's not just like our own satisfaction or if we, you know, get to that point where it's like, oh, okay, I feel like I got the whole story now. Like that's on the other side of that, you're also considering the other person. You know,
Yeah,
are they comfortable?
yeah, like I can be satisfied with someone telling me I'm not going there. That's me being told this is all of the context I'm willing to give you, and you are welcome for letting you have this much. And I'm completely fine with that. That like you don't have to be probing to the point where you're like a super detective who's trying to like sleuth out all of the God, what was the name of the murder? Now you got me on this LA Noir kick, and this is gonna drive me nuts for the rest of the episode.
Well, on the same like, I hate to bring up the the perfect training manual that is LA Noir, but there is people's body language can tell you a lot about how comfortable they are. And I mean, if you're doing an interview online, it's a little bit harder, but you can also in intonations of people's the way that they speak, you can tell if they're enthusiastic or not. If they are trying to say a little bit less, like the less they speak, the less they probably want to talk about something. But if you're conducting an interview where you see someone one on one, the more open their body language is, the more they do want to talk about something. If they maybe cross their arms or put things in front of them between them and you, they are closing off a little bit more. They don't might not want to talk about something, as well as you can definitely notice the difference between, of course, their face. If they smile or their face lights up, they do want to talk about something, but also if they're leaning forward, if they lean in towards you, then they are psyched about whatever they're talking about. And if they push back or move farther away, they're less likely to want to talk about something, as well as if their face kind of does turn off slightly. Turn off is not the best word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, like I can safely say I've been very lucky in that I've never had to deal with like the really hard hitting, like what happened to your family kind of questions. And most of the time when I interview people, it's about stuff they're already super jazzed about, so I don't have to do a lot of prodding and poking to get them to feel like opening up.
Cameron, I'm sorry. I hate to break it right now, but this is actually an intervention. You're the one that we have to ask questions to. So
I knew this was coming. I knew, like, the moment I accepted the call, I knew this was coming.
One of the things that's really important here is that, you know, we're kind of using traditional journalism as the map for this kind of deep dive into interviewing. But with most people, their podcasts aren't going to center around asking those really hard, life-defining questions. Usually, there's some podcasts that do that. One guy that I had on my show a long time ago, his name is Brandon Gordon, and he is the host of Surviving the Narcissist Apocalypse podcast. And he does get into those really probing questions, and sometimes he does have to just obey those, you know, hard no signals where they're like, no, I don't want to talk about this anymore, because he's crossing a gap where there's emotional trauma behind that question, and if they start to talk about it, it's gonna like just destroy the entire flow of the episode. Like, he's had to cut interviews before because of things that happened with people that he's talked to, or he gets halfway through an interview and he finds out that he's actually talking to a narcissist, and he's had to just complete, because sometimes narcissists...
Did M. Night Shyamalan write that episode? That's a twist.
It is, but sometimes narcissists pretend that they're victims, so that, like, of narcissism, so that they get more attention. So he has to kind of, you know, play that that initial conversation process really carefully. Thankfully, a lot of us aren't doing hard stuff like that. Instead, we sit down and we talk about the things that we like, and talk to people that like the same things that we do. And so we like content creation. So when we bring on guests to this show, we're all talking about content creation, and that completely changes the context of challenging questions. In the spirit of that, we have been talking about emotionally hard questions and kind of knowing where that boundary is. You accept that hard no. But what does a challenging question look like when everyone is enjoying the conversation?
One of my favorite people, well, I'm obviously going to shout out NPR. As part of...
Wait, NP what? What is that?
The NPR, this is the National Public Radio, and there's...
I don't listen to the radio.
And Out on the Wire, if I recall, has a companion series of interviews that were done with NPR staff, and one from Robert Smith of the Planet Money podcast. Now that I've plugged all their stuff and we're just really plugged in there.
They're not going to sponsor us. They're not.
What if they did, though? Attitude. What would that be like?
Oh, I would be very happy.
Okay, now that I've blown out my mic. No, what I love is, so a lot of the times for Planet Money, or, you know, the vast majority of NPR stuff, they have to interview very technical people in very dry subjects. And so Robert Smith has more or less created a habit of, and he brings this up in the Out on the Wire, he'll just ask like a really wild metaphor, and he'll just kind of keep asking it until the guy that he's talking to, or whoever he's talking to, makes the metaphor make sense. Like, oh, so it's like a pizza where you just take a slice. No. Oh, so it's like I guess going Dutch on a check for a pizza where you only took one slice. No. So it's like trying to figure out which pizzeria you want to go to. Actually, that one's... No, I guess it would be more like if you wanted to go to a pizzeria, but you had to get all of them to agree before you even brought up pizza. And so, like, getting those kind of, like, weird metaphors, especially if they're invested and want to, like, they're excited about this topic and realize that you're trying to help them get to this place of common understanding, that can be a fun way to get them to open up.
Yeah, like kind of meeting them halfway kind of thing.
Yeah, it's...
Well, maybe not with challenging questions about their childhood, but...
But it's like that. It's like you said, Ken, with your comment on improv last episode, was very much yes and, where they want to be invested and they'll want to understand that you're trying to make this idea that is super complicated, and they clearly have a PhD, so they understand it and you don't. Try to make that more salient to us lay people. Then, yeah, the fact that you're trying to come at them with these metaphors and get that extra context, that ideally they're open to it.
More often than not, you're not going to be in a live setting where like something they say can't be edited out, but definitely making sure you're not breaking their trust with, like Cameron said in the last episode, don't take anything they say out of the context, as well as don't put in something they just like deliberately said not to put in, or don't talk about something they deliberately said not to talk about. A really good example is Robert Downey Jr. was doing a press tour for I don't even remember the movie, and this one interviewer just started bringing up his history of like how he went to jail and other stuff, and Robert Downey Jr. was just like, what is this? And the guy's just like, oh, well, just this history about whatever. And Robert Downey Jr. like looked at his publicist, looked at the interviewer and said bye-bye, and took off his mic and left. And they'll just do that if somebody deliberately feels like you're breaking their trust, because that's what an interview is trust that not only you're going to talk about something they want to talk about and everybody's going to have either a good time or feel like they're in good hands, but also the fact that like you don't want to make any enemies. That's not the point of an interview, unless there are kind of malicious interviewers sometimes.
Gotta get that pre-interview dog.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just like one a practical question: is there maybe some go-to questions that we could recommend? Because generally, I just feel like we're saying, well, ask somebody to tell you more. So is that sort of the catch-all? Like, if you can't think of anything else, just say, "Tell me more."
It's not telling me more. You wanna make it clear that you're listening, so you want to play back. Like in this case, I would say, "Well, Dan, why don't you tell me more about what specifically you mean by tell me more?"
Whoa.
So meta. Wow.
I'm getting so meta this episode.
my
I'm
brain's
going to be
spinning.
beyond this podcast by next episode.
No, but what you're saying is listen to what they've said and use that in your question.
Like if you keep telling them tell me more, it just comes off as like you just are trying to get them to talk. But if I'm explicitly responding to what they just said, you're clearly conveying that you were listening to what they said and you're inviting them to tell you more. You're engaged and excited by this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, with actionable items for whoever's conducting an interview, definitely if you're going to ask a challenging question, first if we're going at this chronologically, like we said, first thing, make sure before the interview you've told them how the tone by which this interview will go, and if you will get into some sensitive topics, if they're comfortable with that. And then when you're in the interview and they do have that little bit of a not red flag, but they have that, like I said, spidey sense moment where you're like, oh, I can tell that there's something in there. I'm doing my LA Noire detective bit, and I saw that when they mentioned this one thing, there's either some baggage there or some sort of ulterior story, and then doubling back and saying, oh, well, you mentioned this, and saying exactly what they said back to them. Don't try to load it with anything. Like if they said, oh, it was a tough year, and then saying like, wow, you had a horrible year, I want to hear about it. Saying, I heard you said it was a tough year and I would like to hear more about that. Or rephrasing it in a way where you say exactly what they said and then transitioning into, do you have anything else to add about that? And working off that. Those are the things that I think we've said far in the episode are particularly actionable.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for part 2 of this 3-part series. Hopefully, if you haven't listened to the one before, you will go do that. And tune in next week for the final part to this interviewing series. Thank you, Keon, for being here. And we will catch you guys on the next one.
Yeah, take that, Cameron. He thanked me.
Cameron's always here.
Is that real?
I am eternal.